Live from London, this is BBC News. It's 1,000 days since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the message from President Zelensky: Ukraine will never submit.
And we must push Russia toward just peace. Every blow and every threat from Russia must be met with firm sanctions.
A Hong Kong court sentences 45 democracy activists to years in prison in a controversial national security trial.
It is unfair trial and it's an unreasonable trial. So even one day, they don't deserve to be in the prison.
Thousands of farmers are in London to protest the government's planned changes to inheritance tax. And Spain's king and queen are back in Valencia. It's still reeling from last month's deadly floods. Hello, I'm Lucy Hawkins. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. It's 1,000 days since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, triggering Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. And President Zelensky says his country will never submit. If we can take stock of some of the figures since February 2022, Ukraine has suffered almost 12,000 civilian deaths, with more than 10 million Ukrainians forced to leave their homes, and at least 6 million living as refugees abroad. Ukraine's population has dropped by a quarter since the invasion began. More than 19,500 Ukrainian children have been forcibly transferred or deported to Russia itself and other Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. Some, though, have managed to return. And on the front line, weary troops are battling on numerous fronts. Russia has made rapid gains in the Donetsk region over recent weeks and claims to have captured villages in the eastern region as well, increasing its control in the south and east of the country. And Kyiv, other cities continuing to be targeted by Russian drones and missiles. This is the northeastern border town of Kharkiv, where officials say 11 people, that includes a child, were killed overnight in a drone attack on a residential building. A Russian attack over the weekend involving 120 missiles and 90 drones caused major damage to Ukraine's power grid. Well, President Zelensky delivered an impassioned speech to the European Parliament just a few hours ago, condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine 1,000 days ago, and said that Russia must be pushed towards a just peace, warning that President Putin would not stop on his own and that strong sanctions are needed.
Now, Putin has brought 11,000 North Korean troops to Ukraine's borders. This contingent may grow to 100,000. While some European leaders think about, some elections or something like this at Ukraine's expense, Putin is focused on winning this war. He will not stop on his own. The more time he has, the worse the conditions become. Every today is the best moment to push Russia harder, and it's clear without certain key factors, Russia will lack real motivation to engage in meaningful negotiations. Without fires in its ammunition depots on Russian territory, without disrupted military logistics, without destroyed Russian air bases, without its lost capabilities to produce missiles and drones, and without its assets being confiscated. You know very well that Putin does not value people or rules. He values only money and power. These are the things we must take away from him to restore peace.
President Zelensky there speaking to the EU Parliament. Well, if we can take you to Rio and Brazil, leaders of the G20 meeting there have voiced support for what they've called a comprehensive, just and durable peace in Ukraine. The statement came after the US gave permission for Ukraine to use American-made long-range missiles against targets inside Russia. It was a decision welcomed by European leaders at the summit. Ukraine's foreign minister has said the use of these missiles will have a positive impact on the battlefield. For more on what kind of difference they could make, here's our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera.
They have a range of nearly 200 miles, more than other systems. That will allow them to target positions behind Russian front lines and hit concentrations of troops including the North Koreans, as well as ammunition and supply depots. One problem, though, is the supply of missiles may be limited, and the Russians have had time to move aircraft out of range.
The Kremlin has vowed a tangible response, and President Putin has today signed a decree broadening the scope for when the Kremlin would consider using nuclear weapons. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says aggression against the Russian Federation by any non-nuclear state with the participation or support of a nuclear state is considered as their joint attack. Now, this is being seen as a clear warning to the West, following President Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use ATACMS missiles to hit targets inside Russia. Well, with me here in the studio is the BBC's Oksana Kundarenko, who is from Ukraine and was watching President Zelensky as he spoke earlier, firstly to the nation and then to the European Parliament. Oksana, as Ukraine marks 1,000 days, how are people feeling?
Well, Zelensky is putting on a brave face, and he cannot afford otherwise because he needs support. But the reality is that Ukraine is facing very real problems, both on the battlefield, and civilians feel it as well, because everyone in Ukraine, no matter how far they live from the Russian border, they live in constant terror and fear of the Russian missile attack or drone hitting. So people have seen hell. People have lost everything. And I can tell you the moods in Ukraine are to fight no matter what, because people cannot lose anymore. And from personal experience, I can tell you that the other feeling is revenge. So people want to fight back and they want to win.
So how do people in Ukraine feel when they hear the international community or others say it's time to reach some kind of deal, some kind of compromise? Why don't you give Russia Crimea or parts of the Donbass?
Well, giving up territories would not solve the problem. They know this because they know the price of Moscow's promises is just empty words. Today they get Donbass, Crimea, tomorrow they will come for more. And that's why Zelensky is trying to convince the world leaders that the only language Putin understands is power. So Ukrainians are not ready to sacrifice. They have nothing else to lose, and they are ready to fight until the last man standing.
Moscow, though, still sending thousands of troops to the front line, Oksana, and now the North Korean troops that are there to reinforce what is happening. And conscription is a real issue inside Ukraine. What about the sentiment around young people being conscripted into the military to fight in such numbers?
Yeah, it's true. All those who wanted to volunteer, men and women, they already joined the army, and it is quite tricky to conscript those people, especially those people who are not motivated. But I must say that today modern wars are not won with a sheer majority on the battlefield. It's the war of weapons, it's the war of tactics, it's the war of technology, and that's why the Western decisions such as giving Ukraine F-16s or allowing the long-range missiles inside Russia are very crucial ones, and we already see some positive effects for Ukraine on the battlefield of these decisions when the supply lines are cut and airfields of Russia are being hit. So Ukraine thinks that with the right support from the West, this war can be won.
Oksana, thank you so much. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because we've just had a news line in actually from the Russian Defense Ministry on the use of those long-range missiles, the ATACMS that we've been talking about. And we understand that the debris of one of these ATACMS missiles has actually fallen on a military facility in the Bryansk region. That's coming to us from the Russian Defense Ministry. So that's something we're going to be looking at in more detail coming up at 13:30 GMT, because we're going to be joined by a number of experts to talk about the war in Ukraine. We want to answer your questions, the things that you want to know about the conflict. Do get in touch using the hashtag BBC Your Questions, or email your questions at bbc.co.uk, and that's taking place, that discussion, in about an hour and 20 minutes time. The European Union is the latest body to condemn the sentences handed down to 45 pro-democracy activists as an unprecedented blow to freedoms. The British government said Hong Kong is using security law to criminalise political dissent. The US, Australia and rights groups have also condemned Hong Kong's largest national security trial as evidence of shrinking political freedoms in the city. But Hong Kong Security Minister Chris Tang maintains that the sentences reflected the severity of the crime. The activist was sentenced to jail terms terms that spanned from 4 all the way to 10 years. And their crime was organising a vote to pick opposition candidates for local elections. Benny Tai, who is a lawyer identified in the judgment as a mastermind of the plan, received one of the longest terms. Many of those sentenced were already in prison. Relatives were outside the court and were devastated. They've been speaking after the sentencing.
I want to emphasize one thing very clear, that it is unfair trial and it's an unreasonable trial. So even one day, they don't deserve to be in the prison.
Of course, it will silence more people because you see how a primary can be illegal and lead to 10 years of sentencing. So, of course, it will silence more people.
Emily Lau is the former chair of the Democratic Party in Hong Kong, former member of the Legislative Council as well. Emily, I know you were also outside the courthouse when those sentences were handed down, and we're hearing how utterly devastated the families were. What was your reaction?
Well, of course, we are very, very sad and very angry. And I myself and hundreds of others could not get into the court building because they said all the seats were taken up. And so we just got the news outside the courthouse. And those people, the defendants have been locked up for, over 3.5 years. In fact, they were arrested on the very same day that the supporters of Donald Trump stormed Capitol Hill. And now very soon, Trump is going to be president of the US again. And these people are still languishing in prison just for taking part in a primary election. Oh, how devastating.
Devastating for those that were outside the court, Emily, but I wonder what all of this means and the severity of these sentencings means for the whole pro-democracy movement.
Well, there is still a little bit of pro-democracy movement here because some groups have disbanded, others have left the territory, and others just don't want to do anything because they don't want to be arrested. My group, the Democratic Party, is still around, but we were not allowed to take part in the district council election last time. In the last few months, we could not even host a dinner party for our party members and friends. They put pressure on the restaurants to cancel the booking. And we cannot raise money because we cannot get permission. But we carry on. Next month, we will hold our annual general meeting to elect a new leadership. But tomorrow, the leader of my party, Mr. Low Kin Hei, will be in court because he was arrested 5 years ago for taking part in unauthorized assembly. He was tried and he was found not guilty, but the administration appealed. Tomorrow, the High Court will hear the appeal. So this goes on and on. But I can tell you, I'm not going to say, oh, the game is over. We're all finished. No. Carry on. We'll do it in a legal, peaceful, and orderly way, and with dignity. We want the Chinese government and the Hong Kong authorities to deliver what they promised in the joint declaration, 1984 joint declaration that Britain signed with China. Yesterday, British Prime Minister
Emily, I'm going to ask you about Sir Keir Starmer, but I just want to show our viewers pictures of the G20 leaders arriving to their summit, which is happening right now in Rio de Janeiro. We can see these pictures, and we'll continue to cover this summit here on BBC News. What was your reaction, Emily, when we know that Sir Keir Starmer met with President Xi Jinping? Because we understand that he did raise with him the issue of human rights and what was happening with some of those that have been arrested in Hong Kong. He did raise those issues with President Xi.
Well, I hope so. And we would like to see some results. And a few weeks ago, the Foreign Secretary was in Beijing meeting with his Chinese counterpart. So I'm not against people who want to do business, who want to make money. But I just want Britain and China to remember that they have these documents, joint declaration and the basic law. which guarantee our freedom, our personal safety, and the rule of law. These things that we cherish. And these are the things that people feel are evaporating before our very eyes.
Emily, it's very good to get your thoughts again, and thank you so much for joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you.
Farmers across Britain have gathered in London for protests against changes to inheritance tax rules. They were announced last month. From April 2026, farms with a value of £1 million, that's about $1.3 million or more, will be subject to an inheritance tax rate of 20%. The National Farmers Union has accused the government of betrayal, but ministers say most farmers won't pay the tax. The TV presenter Jeremy Clarkson owns a farm and is among those protesting near Downing Street.
How bad could this be for farmers, Jeremy?
It's the end.
In a hard right, Kenny?
If you actually stop and pay attention, it's the end.
Hard right, hard right. Thank you. In terms of land like Kent, where £1 million is easy to hit, how damaging is this? And you say it's the end. I mean,
I talked to a man the other day, 600 cows, so not massive. The cows alone are worth 1.2 million before you've got any land or tractors.
Do you regret getting into farming now you see how difficult it is?
Keep down the right hand side. I regret it because I'm a journalist at heart and it's a good story.
So those farmers are outside Westminster, and it is not a nice day here in London, across many parts of the country, in fact, with sleet and snow. But they are braving the conditions to make their anger and their thoughts known. We can take you to outside Westminster to join my colleague who is there, Martine Croxall. Martine, what have the farmers been telling you today?
Lucy, there's a great deal of anger here amongst the thousands of people who have streamed into London from all over the country, and a lot of them find it very difficult to leave their farms for the day, particularly if they're dairy farmers or livestock farmers, of course. There's been a short procession of people who've turned up for this big protest along Whitehall, and there's a stage being set up outside Downing Street. I'm joined by two young farmers who have, again, taken a day out from their farms. Ed Ringer, who farms in Northamptonshire, and Will Warner, not far away, who farms in Warwickshire. Both of you are livestock farmers. Ed, why did you feel it was important for you to be here today when it is actually quite difficult to take a day off?
It's our future, isn't it? At the moment, you know, the way things are going to plan out at the moment, we haven't really got a future. If things play out how the Labour government wants.
Because you've got a farm of 250 acres, which is a family farm. Well, yours is a bit bigger, 500 or so acres. And you're having now conversations with your dad, who you farm with. And what are you having to talk about?
About passing it on to the next generation. It's a difficult chat anyway. And now it's even more difficult, the fact that you may have to sell part of your farm to be able to continue farming. Like I say, I'm fifth generation and hope to carry the farm on and pass it on to the next generation. Well, if you have to pay seven-figure sums every time you pass the farm down, it's not going to last very long.
You did a calculation of how many years' profit it would cost you. What was that?
If on a good year a farm, but obviously you paid your wage. If you turn over a profit of 50,000 for your few sheep you've got or whatever, it'd be 30 years of your profit would pay the inheritance tax if you didn't get it within the window that they're giving you now and stuff like that.
Just briefly and finally, Ed, the government is saying, look, very few farmers will actually be affected. What do you hope the Chancellor will consider in light of all these people turning out today?
Well, hopefully you think they'd realise and see the light and reverse it all. It can't happen. It can't happen. We'll be out of business, just like that. You can't do it. We can't do it.
Ed, Will, thank you very much for talking to us. And the protest continues here, and there's been a bit of a procession along Whitehall past the Houses of Parliament, and the hope is of the people who've organised this that MPs will reconsider the policy of changing inheritance tax for farms.
Martine, see you throughout the day. Thank you. Thousands of people from across New Zealand have gathered in the country's capital, Wellington, at the end of a 9-day march against a controversial bill that seeks to reinterpret the country's founding treaty with the Māori people. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, arguing that the legislation would dilute the rights of the Indigenous Māori, who make up nearly 20% of the population. Katie Watson is there.
Kill the bill! Kill the bill! Kill the bill!
The message was loud and clear. Mess with the Treaty of Waitangi and you're messing with the rights of the Maori people, the first inhabitants of this land they call Aotearoa. The crowds kept coming. Throughout the day, spontaneous hackers broke out, Maori war cries rallying supporters to do battle with a government they say is undermining them.
We're safer together, really. That's what gives Parliament its right to operate. You know, it's that manaakitanga, come, haramai, you're welcome here, you do you, we do us. All together we'll thrive, but when the scales sort of get tipped up, everybody's in danger, not just Māori.
I just wanted to come in solidarity and support it because it doesn't actually just feel like a Māori issue, it feels like a Aotearoa issue, really, for everyone who lives here.
The rally was the culmination of a long journey, a 9-day hikoi, or peaceful march, that started at the top of New Zealand's North Island. It's been a chance to protest and to reflect on what this law could mean for New Zealand.
The division that you are seeing was not caused by this bill.
For David Seymour, who's introduced this plan, it's about treating everyone here as equals, rather than giving special treatment to Māori.
What my treaty principles bill says that I, like everybody else, whether their ancestors came here 1,000 years ago, like some of mine did, or just got off the plane at Auckland International Airport this morning to begin their journey as New Zealanders, have the same basic rights and dignity.
The man pushing through this bill says this is a noisy minority. They don't represent the majority of New Zealanders. But the turnout today shows the strength of feeling against the direction the government's going in when it comes to Maori rights.
And that was clear last week too when this happened. A Maori MP taking a stand in a traditional way. That led to the suspension of Parliament and began a broader conversation about minority rights.
To see it in our, in Parliament, in the highest house of political being in Aotearoa, there's been a real state of surprise. And I think real expression of disappointment and sadness that in 2024, when we see politics in the Trump extremes, that this is what Māori are having to endure in Aotearoa.
The bill's unlikely to pass, but that's not the point, say protesters. The fact politicians are even questioning Māori's position in society is damaging enough. Katie Watson, BBC News in Wellington.
Let's take you to China, where police have arrested a 39-year-old man, a driver of a car, after a number of people, including school children, were injured when this car crashed into them outside a primary school. This was in central Hunan province. There's lots of video on social media showing, as you can see, well, you can't see here, but we've seen it, people on the ground and passerbys breaking into the car as well with metal rods. Our Beijing correspondent Laura Bicker has more.
This incident happened just as children were making their way to school just after 8 in the morning in China's central Hunan province. What we know so far is from social media and from speaking to some parents who were taking their children to school is that there was incredible panic, that there were several parents and children lying on the road and injured, that the ambulances, they told us, arrived very fast. But it does seem that parents and security officials at the school managed to pin down the driver as they awaited police. We are told that that driver is currently in custody. But this is the third attack on a crowd in China in 1 week. On Saturday, 8 people were killed and 17 others were injured in a knife attack at a school in eastern China. And that is said to have been a 21-year-old who was upset at his exam results. And last Monday, a driver rammed into crowds outside a sports centre, killing 35 people and injuring more than 40 others. That was the deadliest attack that they've seen here in China in just about a decade. That driver was apprehended, and it said that he was upset at his divorce settlement. There have been a spate of incidents right throughout the year, making it one of the highest number of incidents in the last 6 years of people attacking crowds in China.
Spain's King and Queen have returned to the epicentre of the catastrophic floods, where they were heckled during an initial visit. These were the scenes when the couple visited the area 15 days ago, when they faced insults and had mud thrown at them by angry residents. At least 220 people died in the floods. In the town of Paipota, which was the epicenter of the disaster, a huge cleanup operation continues more than a fortnight on. The King and Queen are there again today in Valencia. We're starting to get a little more detail about that breaking news I was bringing you earlier, talking about these long-range missiles that President Biden has given Ukraine permission to use, the Attacker missiles. We are hearing from Vitaly Shevchenko, who is monitoring Russian media, that these US-made operational tactical Attacker missiles were used and 5 have been shot down, 1 damaged. Its fragments fell on a service area at a military facility in the Bryansk region, which is right on the border with Ukraine, and we understand this has caused a fire which was quickly put out. So the Russian Ministry of Defense saying Ukraine has fired American Attacker missiles at a target in the Bryansk region in the early hours, and that 5 were shot down and 1 was damaged. So a significant development there to bring you. It's been 1,000 days since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and we'll continue our coverage here on BBC News. So stay with us.